Welcome to the Thunderdome, where Mad Maxey rules. I feel like I need some war paint, though. I need a little bit of, you know what I mean, some dust and some shoulder pads with spikes on them to really give the proper Mad Maxey vibes. But what an eruption, man. Welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU works 8 threes from this kid in step-back fashion and catch-and-shoot fashion. Yeah, of course, Joel goes for over 40, almost 90 in 2 games. We will get to that. And we'll get to Joel being the troll of all trolls and this incredible athletic article about his personality and who he is from the people who are around him and love him and enjoy being with him. But real candid stuff that is awesome if you haven't gotten to it. But let's talk about Maxey. And, the Sixers trying to finish this slate out. Another game where James Harden wasn't the James Harden that maybe people expect. But finally, a game where Maxey sheds all of that nonsense and just says, you know what, I'm going to go out here and ball out and get mine and shoot these threes. And it's funny, he only made, 9 shots and 8 threes. So there's like one other 2-point basket for him on the night. But oh, man, it was like every time he shot it, you thought it was going in. And you've had that feeling about him sometimes in other games where his shot looks so clean. But man, what an eruption, though. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's really hard to get your head both around last night and just his overall improvement as a three-point shooter. So many numbers you can turn to. For me, just the one that stands out is so he made 8 threes last night, and as a rookie, he made 31. So last night was over 25% of his made threes as a rookie. And of course, the percentage has leaped to nearly 43, and it was 30.1 his rookie season, and it was 29 in his 1 year at Kentucky. And to the Sixers' credit, on draft night, they were very insistent. Like, this kid, Daryl Morey specifically, this kid is going to be a better shooter than the numbers indicate. We don't have any concerns about that part of his game. And they were right. And the formula for success has been really simple. He's worked hard and he's trusted that it would pay off. And he's blessed with both this innate self-belief and then also, of course, the talent to bring all the hard work into fruition in this extreme way that I just think no one else anticipated. But a lot of fun. And of course, those 8 were a part of the Sixers franchise record 23 rather, on pace for 31 at one point. I don't know why it came to mind, but just some of the numbers last night were truly hard to fathom. And sure, coming against not the strongest opposition, the Pacers very shorthanded, very young, and this loss was their 8th in a row. But I don't think that detracts from, of course, Maxey's just insane improvement, both as a shooter and overall. And, I don't think it's necessary, or at least on my end, to get too deep into the weeds of who deserves to be most improved or what specifically should merit that award, but just take the award picture out of it and ask who are the most improved players in the league this year. Clearly, he's one of the top few. That's hard for me to, find a great argument against. I mean, right. This just doesn't happen where someone not only increases their three-point percentage by about 13 points, but also just skyrockets volume-wise. And these aren't simple threes that he's getting either. Sure, some of them are catch-and-shoot looks generated by stars, but the sidestep 3 is now regularly in his bag, shooting them in transition, shooting them with the pull-up. Just every kind of 3, he's taking it. And last night he was making quite a few of them.
And, with the NCAA tournament in the books, it was funny to see Maxey on Twitter kind of lamenting the fact that he didn't play in the tournament. And Sixers fans better be glad that he didn't play, because you could just see him blossoming there and kind of coming into his own in those – because we see him in these tight situations now and these high-pressure moments and his speed and, the way he gets up and down the floor. You could see that on a national scale, just enticing GMs and front offices and teams across the league. So that's one thing. And then, number 2, Doc Rivers with these comments that before the game that on blackout days, they have to lock the gym to keep this dude out of there. Like, Tyrese Maxey is on days when they're not supposed to practice, they're supposed to be recovering, rehab, rest. He's still in the gym trying to get shots up, trying to get better, trying to be a better version of himself. And you can't take stuff like that lightly, man, because there will be a time, if things work out the way they should, that this is more Maxey's team maybe than other players, and the leadership and the precedent that that sets of the work ethic and continuing, the things and being in line with how Joel and Tobias and James Harden also had that type of work ethic. It's just phenomenal to see from a guy who's only 21 years old, and he shares the floor last night with Tyrese Halliburton, who you can see why he was so enticing of a pickup possibly in a Ben Simmons deal with the Sacramento Kings, and why the Pacers were ready to make the move for him for Sabonis, and he's under team control. The contract is friendly, and he's in the top 10 in three-point percentage in the league. And so you have two guys in the top 10 in three-point percentage shooting over 40%. And he was pulling up from East Jablip a few times as well and draining them. So this real great young talent on display. Upsetting that talent helped the Pacers come back in the second half, but just good watching, them do their thing out on the floor last night.
Yeah, the league is in a good spot when it comes to young talents named Tyrese. I think last night stood out to us. With Maxey and having to lock the gym and make sure that he's actually adhering to these blackout days, it's funny because he's mentioned a few times that he thinks he's gotten a little better with recognizing the importance of taking care of his body and being smart when it comes to not overdoing it. But of course, we know that his primary instinct is like, just get in a gym. Like, if there's any choice of what do I want to do, it's get in a gym and put shots up. And of course, that's great. And some of the stuff with longevity and avoiding injuries, perhaps that becomes a little more relevant down the line when he's 31 years old, but he's 21 now, and I don't think there's any problem with he wants to spend an extra hour or two sneaking shots up, even if the Sixers don't love that idea. So yeah, that's great to have, and a young player that more and more, like you say, looks like a franchise cornerstone of the future, regardless of what happens here in the short term. And I think he was not the only one, of course, who was firing everything he got last night. And that is exactly what Joel Embiid and James Harden have wanted from the guys around them throughout this season. Embiid has at times borderline pleaded his teammates, like, when you are open, please shoot the ball. And everyone was doing that last night. Tobias Harris included, 0 for 5 in Cleveland from long range, and then bangs in his
started the party last night, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, started everything on the right foot. Probably the one notable exception is Matisse Thybulle. Got a couple open ones early, missed them, and then was not firing threes the rest of the night. But that's okay. That was far from necessary.
You're being nice, Noah. He shot an air ball for the first shot of the game.
Yeah,
blew a couple of layups he shouldn't have going up.
Layups,
man,
yeah, the layups definitely to me are more valid sources of criticism than him missing a couple threes. We've talked about the layups before in some of his history there, going back a little while, and it looked like, okay, whatever, he missed a couple layups in the third quarter, and then honestly, as the Pacers creep closer and closer, you were thinking, boy, could those bite?
That was a jumping off point, right?
Yeah, it fueled a little momentum, and the Sixers clearly lost focus and intensity and all that good effort-related stuff as the Pacers continued to play hard and fast, and the Sixers allowed them back into a game they really had no business being in. But out of the 9 rotation players, 7 made threes, and the one who did not, in addition to Thybulle, was, of course, DeAndre Jordan, and that would have been wholly unexpected if he was part of the three-point party. So cool to see the Sixers have another great night from long range, because it wasn't that long ago they tied the franchise record. They got 21 against the Hornets last Saturday, and now 23 is the new number to beat.
And 17 in the first half, which was almost an NBA record at that. So it just goes to show that I talked about in the last podcast, man, these baby steps, these incremental steps forward, you're going to have to embrace and be happy with those things because they're clearly trying to get some things right and they're starting to show themselves in the game. And, you mentioned Matisse Thybulle, and let's continue on that thought before we get to Joel Embiid and DeAndre Jordan as well. But, Matisse, you see him in the Cleveland game, and I think he hit a couple threes there. And we come here to this game, and it just goes to show he just doesn't quite have it in the way he wants to have it yet. And I want him to keep shooting. I'm okay with like you said, the 3-pointers. I think there's some progress he's making there, and you're going to have to live with the growing pains. The layups, man, I'm just frustrated, and I've been telling more and more people like, Noah on the podcast was saying that, on the Redick podcast that he talked about 7th and 8th grade that he kind of had these issues, but he's overcome them. But, history can repeat itself. You know what I mean? Maybe he's having a little hang up there. But I just really would encourage, like, there was one time, I want him to dunk the ball because he can fly and he is, let's give him 6'6". There was a time at the second half, he tried to go up with 2 hands and dunk it and ended up getting it blocked. And I hope that doesn't discourage him from doing that in the dunker spot when he's in a crowd next time. But, I'm okay with a game like last night with Matisse, not being quite what he should be and, learning from that because I think that's what everybody's doing in a certain aspect is learning from their mistakes in this little short time frame of this new unit trying to come together, Harden approaching 20 games with this team. And I really think like that's the idea is that we're going to go out as a team, fail together, succeed together, win together, lose together. That's what's going to build them into this playoff juggernaut, I think, as they try to, make this push. And I just feel like I'm okay with the baby steps. I'm going to take them as they come because I think the approach, as I've talked about before, is in the losses, there's a lesson. There's something to learn for them, even though there's some drawbacks or, hiccups. Everybody's playing well. Matisse has this tough outing. There's something to learn there, and I hope that that's their approach. It seems to be that's the way they're thinking about it.
Definitely. You heard Joel Embiid say to reporters that the starter shouldn't have had to play the fourth quarter of that game, and I'm not going to disagree with him on that. Clearly, this was one of those nights where you figured the key players shouldn't have needed to.
Was it 82 in the first half? Was that what the number was?
That sounds right. Yeah, 80 plus, and the lead was as high as 27 points, and it got as low as 4. Got as low as 4 with the undrafted Dwayne Washington Jr. Coming on strong there early in the fourth quarter. With Thybulle, clearly he's had ups and downs. That's kind of characteristic of his game and of his season. I think overall the efficiency and the production has improved a little with James Harden and just the notion that it's viable most nights to play him 20 plus minutes. It looks a little stronger when he's playing most of those minutes next to Harden. So I think that's positive, but clearly the confidence level is not immense when it comes to either the long range shooting or the layups, frankly. And that's not an ideal spot to be in. Even just, you don't want to read too much into the body language, quote unquote, but when he misses these layups, he's of course like puts his head in his hands. He's like really frustrated with himself and beats himself up in a way that you don't see from someone like Tyrese Maxey, who's of course full of confidence and kind of laughs off a missed layup or, is surprised that it happened. With Thybulle's like, man, I can't believe I missed another one. You love that he's holding himself to a high standard and that he wants to be better, but just take the next one, make the next one, don't dwell on it. And I think that's the messaging he gets from guys like Danny Green, veterans on this team who know that part of being productive and being consistent is just trusting that if you do the right things, results will follow. So Thybulle is still trying to reach that point, I think, where He's reliable night to night from an efficiency standpoint. And again, the Sixers don't need or expect him to be a high volume guy, either with the inside scoring or the outside shooting. But an 0 for 5, 0 for 4 night in the postseason, of course, would probably hurt the Sixers in many instances. So certainly not a flawless game from him, from the team, but they'll take the positives, learn from the negatives. And as we forecasted going into this late stretch, the expectation was they probably should win most of these games against inferior opponents. And so far they've done that, with the notable exception of the Pistons game, and they'll face the Pistons again once more here.
Do not have your backup center in there against Joel Embiid. These past 2 games, there was no Jared Allen, no Miles Turner, no Malcolm Brogdon last night for the Pacers as well. Duarte didn't play. And listen, man, even the starting centers don't fare much of a chance against Joel Embiid. So to have the backup centers in there trying to slow down this juggernaut, and you hear Tyrese Maxey after the game, like, I'm talking to my mom and dad about just how awesome, Joel is and what he brings to the table, and, just how great he is at basketball. And it just continues to show itself. We have Giannis go for 40 plus in these 2 national games against the Sixers and the Nets, and Joel just comes back and just demolishes his competition, going for almost 90 in these 2 games. So, hey, man, he's in the MVP race for a reason. I think that he's continuing to show, the versatility and the things I outlined in the previous podcast about what he brings that Jokic doesn't. But I don't know what point I knew he had it going on, but the banked 3-pointer at the end of the first quarter, I think, will be the moment where I felt like it was just like, oh, this is going to be one of those type of nights. He's smothered by people. I feel like TJ McConnell at times with the Pacers has changed the momentum of the game against the Sixers, and some of his familiarity with the team and, maybe where guys like to shoot or how they like to receive the ball has put him in situations to get steals or to play great defense or kind of bring some momentum to the Pacers. But there was none of that last night. Well, and some of it in the third quarter, but none of that when Joel was on the floor, because the non-Embiid minutes we will get to, but Joel just one of those nights. I mean, I guess you could say he had it going on from the very start. So I didn't have to go to the end of the first quarter to talk about everything that happened in the actual first quarter.
Right. My personal moment of recognition that he's likely to score 40 plus was probably 27 seconds into that game, where he gets the foul on rookie Isaiah Jackson, who's not the most muscular or experienced player, of course. And Harden picked up the second on Jackson soon after. And just the personnel was not there to handle him. And he's become better and better, I think, at exploiting youth and just making it awfully clear that you need to learn the little tricks of the trade against him, or else you're going to be in a lot of trouble when it comes to fouling him, when it comes to allowing him to score on you one-on-one. And Indiana did try to send a bunch of double teams, but trying and succeeding, of course, are 2 very different things when Embiid's involved. I think in the first half, he had several impressive passes that weren't technically assists, but just, again, continuing to read the double team, show poise, no panic, and hits the open guys. Sixers swing the ball around the perimeter, and that generated some of these many 3-pointers that they knocked down. So it was borderline expected, which is a wild thing to say for someone who scored 45 points. But this is the norm for him when he's going up against like an overmatched team. And of course, he's had 40-plus point performances as well against all-star centers. Jared Allen comes to mind, had a 40-point triple-double against him and the Cavs earlier this year. But in these spots where the other teams throw in 20-year-old, 22-year-old guys out there who probably aren't lifting as much weight in that weight room as Joel Embiid, it's just inevitably going to be a huge problem for that team. And he's ruthless. He he's not at all sympathetic to the other team's play, and piled up some of those scoring numbers. And now that's a little interesting subplot here, whether he is going to win that scoring title race. 3 games left, and a lot of it might ride on just what exactly the Sixers do do they play him all 3 games? Does he play a full load in all 3 games? Are there any blowouts? None of that, of course, is as relevant to him as the MVP race and the Sixers playoff seeding, but a big guy winning a scoring title would be a huge deal, and it's very much on the table.
Yeah, will be the first player since Shaq to do that. He also has his 12th 40-10 game, which ties Wilt Chamberlain, Russell Westbrook for that record in a season. And you have Joel out here just barbecue chickening these defenders. And for the MVP race, I don't think any player it's been a long time, if I could just recollect, that someone who hasn't finished in the top 4 seeds in one of the conferences has won the MVP race. So I think that also plays in Joel's favor, as the Sixers are, maybe pushing for that number 2 spot, possibly, depending on how things play out. So I think that also plays in Joel's favor. But excuse me, it's just a moment where I think that people need to enjoy, what's happening here. And games like last night give people the perfect opportunity to do that before things reset for this playoffs, where the intensity will change and ratchet up. And, Joel and his competitiveness really speaks to this article we're going to talk about a bit later, because it seems that translates to everything he does, which we have heard about great players and whatnot. But let's get into that shortly. We'll talk about the non-Embiid minutes after this break, as well as get into a little Harden discussion as well, because he continues to, shoot below average from the outside as well. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of that, particularly his 3-point shooting. But let's take a time out and get back to that. We'll be right back here on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilMU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
The Sixers have 2 superstars, and James Harden is continuing still to try to figure out the proper fit for him. I'm still being annoyed, Noah, by the fact that he can't catch and shoot. Some of these 3-pointers, like he's Chuck Knobloch trying to throw to first base, or John Lester, or whoever. It's like a couple of moments where he has daylight and then goes into his step back in order to get the 3-point shot off. And he's not shooting a great clip from 3. And I talked about his 3-point numbers over the last 4 games on the last podcast. Last night, I believe he was 2 for 7 again. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it just I don't want it to be a thing where it's something that we talk about every podcast, because yes, he's still figuring it out. And finally, Maxey has this great game when Harden did not. But I just want to know what I'm getting. And I don't feel like the way he's been a bit up and down here, particularly over these last few games, is making me feel comfortable about knowing what to expect. Now, I know what to expect with Joel. I'm starting to feel that way with Maxey. Tobias is showing us that he's developing into this role, but I just don't know. We're definitely not getting that 50-point, dominant solo scorer, that the Houston version of Harden. But are we getting some of that, or more of the playmaker guy? And it just feels like he's morphing into this playmaking role more and more. And I just don't want him to force as many passes sometimes that he tries to force. I want him to shoot open shots. But what I want doesn't seem to matter, obviously. It's just more or less who he is, which we need to come to grips with and be comfortable with. And are you comfortable in coming to grips with that? Are you fine with who Harden is?
I think I'm more on the same page of not being certain of who he is and not knowing how much health and mindset and wanting to fit in and trying to find the right balance in a new team, and all these variables are a factor with this. But I think ideally that top gear is there and he's able to access it when necessary in the playoffs. And I do think we've seen glimpses to indicate that's the case. Had the 25-point first half against the Clippers and some other nice scoring bursts. But just has the 30-plus point performance as a Sixer. The assists and the playmaking have, I think, consistently been there in abundance. And he's proven game after game that he's an excellent passer who legitimately makes guys better, and I think enjoys setting his teammates up and putting them in positions to succeed. So
we had an excellent passer, though. We had that with the guy that they traded for, and we thought we were getting someone who could help with the scoring load. And there has been glimpses of that, but the dude has no lift when it comes to, his in the paint game. And I don't know if when we're facing these better teams in a longer series, how that will play out with his athleticism, maybe being a detriment if he's being guarded by, a guy who's more athletic and can be more disruptive to him and doesn't fall for some of his fakes as much.
Sure, it does certainly seem like on the drives, if he's not getting the calls he wants, that is tending to be an issue, which is not great in forecasting ahead to the playoffs. So I agree with that aspect of it, but I do think Harden deserves probably a little more credit than just replacing a very good passer with another very good passer, because he gives the Sixers so much in their half-court offense that Ben Simmons did not, as far as the pick-and-roll playmaking and all of the
commanded double teams, yeah.
Yeah, and the ways he's, of course, enhanced Joel Embiid as a roller and the attention that he's drawn and the three-point shooting that many of his teammates are profiting with off of those pick and rolls. But absolutely, if he's around 30% from three-point range in the playoffs and
Lord have mercy,
failing to finish around the rim and not turning in any explosive scoring performances, that's going to be difficult for the Sixers to beat elite opponents. I think that's probably a fair assessment of it. I don't think there was anything wrong with the team's offensive performance in the first half, of course, 80-plus points. But then in the second half, yet again, if you're trying to pinpoint what went wrong or why did the Pacers get back into that game, it's the stretch with Embiid off the floor and Harden expected to lead the way and not doing that to the level the Sixers hope he can. Even the little mistakes and careless miscues, they all seem to come when Embiid's off the court, and the Sixers need Harden to lead the way, be the number one scorer, but also just be precise and not help the other team out. Jordan, gets ejected from this game, and the play that leads to it is Harden trying to inbound the ball to him. Indiana picks it off and then goes the other way. Washington goes up for a dunk, and Jordan ends up being called for a flagrant 2 on that play. So definitely the non-Embiid minutes, if they are going to feature Harden, he's got to be better in those minutes than he's been. I don't think there's any question about that.
And DeAndre Jordan, he gets a lot of criticism from the fan base. If you look at the numbers, I think the objective when he is on the floor is to not lose the lead. So if he's a plus in the box score, then those, let's say 10 minutes, 12 minutes he's on the floor, you've won that time. If he's a plus in the box score, the lead didn't dissipate, or maybe it did a bit, but you're still winning the game with the time that he was on the floor and when he checks out and Joel checks in. So I think that is the ultimate objective. The eye test might tell you, oh, he had a few balls slip through his hands, or he didn't finish an alley-oop, or, he's awful at protecting the rim. Those things also can be true. But I think the ultimate objective is not to lose the lead when Joel goes to the bench for a rest. And the minutes, might be closer to 8 minutes in the postseason with the starters playing a bevy of more minutes in the postseason just naturally. And we've seen that it's going to be Niang, Green, Milton, and Jordan off of the bench. Like, that's going to be probably the extent of the playoff bench. So I think you're not asking for a whole lot when with these non-Embiid minutes. It just last night was not a great example of that because the Pacers really took advantage, and a couple of momentum moments with Matisse missing the layups and then that flagrant foul going their way, 2 shots in the ball. It just changes the complexion of the game in that aspect. But you're not asking for a whole lot. So I don't think that should be something that fans should worry about. I do question why Doc doesn't maybe try to go small and try to combat what like some other teams were doing. Me and Ty Johnson from Sixers Outsiders, 97.5 The Fanatic, were talking, and it's like, how many teams in the league actually carry 2 traditional centers? Like, you're replacing the traditional, Joel being a big man. You're replacing him with a guy who is also the exact same traditional type of center, as opposed to maybe trying to go small or kind of match up with teams in the way that they are out on the floor. Like they're playing the Raptors next, and there was a couple of times, especially these last 2 games, where Joel and DeAndre didn't close out all the way to the corner or to the 3-point line, wherever it may be, and the other team, hits a shot or several shots. Stanley Johnson is someone who comes to mind when they played the Lakers. He was exploiting that. So you got, the Raptors with like Chris Boucher and guys who can stretch the floor. That doesn't make me feel good about them as a potential first-round opponent or coming into this next game. So it's just weird that Doc doesn't experiment. And what, everyone wants to say Reed and Bassey, and logically that seems like the people who you would try to help fill that void or fit that mold or experiment with, but we just don't see that from him. And I don't know if it's just his arrogance or him feeling like he knows what's best for the team in all situations, but it makes you wonder. And I don't know, do you have those same thoughts, Noah?
Yeah, there hasn't been much small ball. There's been, I think, 2 instances I can remember where they used it. One of them was just for 60 or 80 seconds. One of it was for a more extended stretch. But there's clearly a reluctance to mix it up, and you figure flexibility tends to be an advantage in the postseason, and the Sixers don't seem great, especially high in that category. I mean, I don't think on the same page as you with thinking it's only 8 or 10 minutes and it's not much of a concern. I think I disagree there. I think it's a significant concern, and I'm not a big concern guy, or I don't like to overstate the extent to which things are worrisome. But if you lose the 8 minutes by 11 points, that's probably going to cost you a lot of games. And
I don't like hearing that.
I don't think that's an exaggeration to project that might happen a few times, because it's happening quite a lot right now with the DeAndre Jordan minutes. The plus minus number, of course, doesn't encapsulate anything close to every aspect of a player's performance, and there are a lot of muddying variables there. But time and time again, him having a very bad plus minus has seemed consistent with him not playing especially well. And I think even if you look back to last postseason, of course, Dwight Howard was one of the more well-credentialed backup centers for Joel Embiid. But in that Hawks series, several of the games the Sixers lost by close margins, Dwight Howard was thoroughly outplayed when he was on the court. And I think DeAndre Jordan is comparable to Howard in the sense that it feels like most of the time he needs to score efficiently and rebound well to compensate for all of his negatives. And Dwight Howard, I think it was games 1, 3, and 7. It might be 1, 5, and 7, but 3 of those games, he didn't score at all. He had several turnovers. He had a bunch of fouls. Those minutes went poorly for him and for the Sixers. Not at all impossible that something similar happens with DeAndre Jordan, or even something worse. I just think that that's probably a fair way to assess it, given where we stand right now. But of course, yeah, the optimistic slant on it is he's not the only guy on the court. Harden plays better. Some of these bench shooters make those long-range looks, and DeAndre Jordan not individually being great isn't going to tank those minutes. But I think absolutely we're again in a spot where the Sixers don't look good at backup center, and that's hurt them before. I think last season to some extent, and then of course quite memorably in 2018-19. I don't think we're quite at that level, but we shall see. I mean, it's not a good spot to be in right now with this team if they continue to stick with Jordan just based on what we've seen thus far.
I don't know why Doc just is hitching his wagon to DeAndre so strongly. Like, it's literally Bassey and Reed can't be worse than DeAndre's been. And they also have the athleticism to be able to be interchangeable, maybe guard multiple players, close out to the 3-point line under control, and, be able to get back and maybe get into the rebounding area as well. So, I'm not going to rack my brain trying to figure out what he's thinking, because it seems like, what he's thinking is what's going to happen. And then we have this speculation out here with his name being rumored as the possible next Lakers coach. So, so many people are glomming or are hopping onto that and feel like that's the answer to the Sixers' woes. I saw somebody saying that let him go to the Lakers and bring Dawn Staley in. But nonetheless, this Doc Rivers is still a highly coveted coach around the league. You talked about in the last podcast what Harden had to say about him when he came over, and one of the best coaches, et cetera, et cetera. Did you make anything of those Lakers rumors when you heard them, and how likely do you think something like that is to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was reported by Jake Fisher at Bleacher Report, who's a very well-sourced reporter who's been on top of a bunch of major NBA news over the last several years. So it's something that you take note of. But, the report was not at all saying that is the expectation, or that the Sixers are eager to see Doc Rivers depart or anything along those lines. So I think that's important context in reading that situation.
But it would make you think that if things don't go how they should in the postseason, that could be.
Yeah, I think that's the big if here. If things don't go well, then clearly a lot of things could change, including what goes on head coach wise. Again, it doesn't feel especially probable to me right now, just in the sense of Daryl Morey's really high on Doc Rivers. Joel Embiid has done great under Rivers. James Harden has a high level of respect for Rivers. All these are pretty significant variables, and it just does seem like the Sixers made a long-term commitment to him, and he's led them to a lot of regular season wins. He's only had one playoff opportunity thus far. Let's see what happens in the second playoffs. But I think if things do change, then absolutely you're looking more closely at those other coaching vacancies and whether Rivers might be sought after for them. And it's interesting to hear that is viewed around the league as a possibility. But for the time being, he's the Sixers head coach, and I think if they win a couple playoff rounds, we're not really looking at this area at all.
Right. And I'm just going to pour a little gasoline on the fire here just because. But you already have, former head coaches, Sam Cassell, who has a very close relationship with the guys on the team, on the bench right now. So you wouldn't maybe have to look far for some candidates that could replace Doc Rivers if they agree to mutually part ways or he gets let go. And I think the way Doc is viewed, for all the Sixers fans out there who obviously we're, looking at all the minutia and details of the decisions he's making, the rotations and who plays and who doesn't. But I think as a whole, going back to Harden's comments when he came over, the league in general views him as, someone who navigated this Ben Simmons situation and was able to continue to keep the Sixers in winning mode and pushing for, being the best team in the Eastern Conference among all those, issues and hiccups. And obviously he was somewhat the voice of the league during the social justice issues that were happening nationally and how players were affected and, all of that stuff, and the way he plays that mentor role from a lot of players across the league. And he's close with a lot of guys across the league as well. So I think that those are the things that I think everyone sees and likes about him, which makes him continue to be a hot name, particularly when it comes to, fixing teams like the Lakers or bringing them back together. And he has, obviously coached in LA for an extended time. He's a known entity and things of that aspect. So, I think he still has a high name recognition around the league and cachet in that area.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, one little piece of recent evidence there is, I believe it is FX will be doing a mini series based on reporting from ESPN's Ramona Shelburne about the Clippers' Donald Sterling era and Doc Rivers' involvement in that. And Doc Rivers will be played by Lawrence Fishburne. So they're getting big name actors to play Doc Rivers and to
great casting.
Yeah, to show his role in that saga. But yeah, I mean that wasn't that long ago when
something else he navigated.
NBA, not only NBA, but like the entire world, or it felt like was paying attention to that situation and all the racism and ugliness with Donald Sterling and how Rivers and his players handled that. And of course, he got a lot of praise for his leadership in that role. And I think just, you saw in his comments with the media, there's a realness and a rawness with the players that just commands respect. Like, you recognize in that spot, especially, it's sometimes not all about the game. It's about the people, and it's not fully about the job all the time. So yeah, that'll be a neat series. I'll definitely be tuning in, and I'm curious to see how well Lawrence Fishburne captures Doc Rivers' voice. It's a unique voice. There's some raspiness, and after especially intense games, it's a bit hoarse, and it's a tough one to replicate. So I will be tuning in and wondering how well Fishburne will be able to pull that off.
I have watched Lawrence Fishburne a lot over the years because our family watches Blackish all the time, and he plays the dad, the grandfather, I should say, on Blackish. So, and I've enjoyed his work over the years in several flicks. So I think he has more than enough chops to pull it off, and I think you do too. But like you said, there are nuances, and you definitely are intrigued on how those players or people are brought to life. And it'll be interesting for sure. And I'll be glued to that as well. And it's happening right now in a lot of aspects with that Lakers series that's on HBO. You're seeing some of these characters, Jerry Buss and Magic Johnson and people being brought to life. Norm Nixon being played by his son in that series. So it's just great to experience those things, particularly when they touch on people that you know pretty well. So I think the other thing that helps us segue into our next topic from that is just the life outside of basketball. And Joel Embiid, particularly in his first few seasons here in Philadelphia, really just captured the city in a way an athlete hadn't in the past. And part of that capturing was the fact that he was out and about. You saw him places where you may not have expected to see a 7-foot NBA star. You saw him doing things maybe on social media and whatnot that you wouldn't expect someone of his status to do. But you see the playfulness of Joel Embiid, and you see, just the type of guy he is. And, we had seen, him near South Street at the basketball courts, windmill dunk on some random dude who was caught up under the basket. We've seen him out here on these tennis courts, but in this athletic article, it just brings all of that to life in a way you may have never expected. And this athletic article tells a lot of interesting points and stories about Joel. You could say the thing that a lot of people have seen on social media was his interaction with Joel and Billy Lang's children at his house, where Joel brought his PlayStation over, and the former Sixers assistant and now St. Joe's coach watched Joel just fry his children in Madden and 2K and just obliterate them and show no mercy and talk trash and belittle his 3 children, all the while being invited over for dinner at his house. So just tell us some great stories about Joel. What were some of the things that you liked from that article or impressions you got from that, Noah?
I thought the details about Embiid and food were fascinating. He likes
it burnt.
Burnt, not even like well done, just burnt. So that's unique. Big on the chicken wings, which I knew. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I had a little memory there where I wrote a feature on Shake Milton his rookie year, and I mentioned the detail of Milton had his locker next to Joel Embiid, and Embiid's locker wasn't the cleanest, and there were some chicken wings strewn on the ground. And I remember some Sixers fans commenting with great disdain on social media about his dietary choices and all of that. Obviously, he's in the best place he's ever been, health, fitness, diet-wise, but the story confirms some of that myth of him having an insatiable appetite and loving his Shirley Temples and his chicken wings and just really loving to eat. And makes sense. Big guy and needs a lot of calories. That's just the reality of it. But yeah, the competitiveness and the trolling and all of that, of course, are characteristic of Joel Embiid. And he's a fun-loving guy, but there is, as I think I mentioned the word before, a ruthless side. That's not just on the court. Like anything that involves competition, you're going to see that in him. And, of course, the comparison everyone makes there with competitiveness is Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Probably those are the 2 primary names that come to mind. Obviously, those guys, I think, are viewed as unparalleled, but Embiid has at least a little of that similar, just all situations intensity. I remember reading about Michael Jordan, ping pong and cards, and of course gambling at UNC, and how he was notorious in those ways. And Embiid, it's the modern era. It's Madden and 2K, even if he's playing against an 8-year-old kid. So yeah, it was a really fun piece by Rich Hoffman and I believe a few other folks co-bylined that at The Athletic. So recommended read if you want a little more on Joel Embiid, the fun-loving but kid-destroying personality.
Is he competing against the steak and the chicken wings? Is that why he wants it so burnt? He wants to see like he can survive it being scolded. I don't know, but the funny thing to me, I don't know if it was Kyle O'Quinn or Justin Anderson telling the story about how he has these wings on the plane, and they have an oven on the plane, and it's only for like warming things up, not for like actually cooking things or whatever. And it's like a 5-hour flight, and he has the wings in the warm-up thing the entire flight because he wants them to be like scalded and burnt. So just a man of extremes, maybe is part of it. He likes a whole pitcher of Shirley Temple. He likes his steak and wings burnt. He likes to, run people into the ground when he plays them in Madden and 2K. So there's some great stories in there. We haven't even gotten to all of them. So check out the article for sure. And shout out, like you said, to Rich Hoffman and the other writers of that piece. But a few more games to go here, people. Not the, sterling run to the finish of these great matchups and whatnot, but we're learning some things about this team as we go along, and I think that's what's most important. And hopefully there is some rest mixed into here, as well as maybe some practice time so they're able to kind of work on some of those things that aren't quite clicking all the way across the board. One more back-to-back. I would anticipate with these last 3 games that we're not going to see Joel and Harden in at least one of them, right? I mean,
well, the scoring title, I am personally curious.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a point I wanted to make and I wanted to get your thoughts on. Sorry to interrupt you, but Joel takes over the scoring title lead, and LeBron and the Lakers are eliminated from playoff contention. So either maybe LeBron decides that, the season's over and doesn't play, or maybe he decides that the scoring title is all I have, so I'm going to go all out trying to win that. Like, where are you at on that?
I'm not in LeBron James's head. I know he is another player where you can't fault the competitiveness, so I'd be surprised if he was sitting out games he had a chance to do well in. But yeah, that will be interesting if he just barely qualifies in terms of percentage of games played and ends up winning the title. I'm sure Sixers fans would, again, not be thrilled with him. So yeah, with that, from the Sixers perspective, I'm reminded of the comment Doc Rivers made, I guess it was Saturday, about wanting Embiid to get the best numbers he can and boost his MVP case. And of course, he doesn't want to risk his players' health, but I'm wondering if that's on his mind a little bit. If it's a blowout game where Embiid is playing in, let's say tomorrow night against Toronto, the Sixers go up 20 early in the fourth quarter. Maybe he keeps Embiid in that game because he's only got 25 points and he wants him to score 35.
Right.
So that's a little variable that I'm curious how the Sixers and Rivers will handle. But the scoring title, of course, is not the end-all, be-all, but it is meaningful, and it's something at the end of the career that people point to as he won X scoring titles. Embiid has a real chance to get it. Now it's just Giannis or LeBron that could potentially seize it from him last minute here. As far as the seeding, the Sixers have right now a 40% chance of finishing number 4. That's according to Basketball Reference. And then they could potentially rise as high as number 2 or number 3. So 3 games left, and there are still quite a few scenarios of how that could play out.
Hey, man, it'll be fun, and we will be ratcheting it up as the playoffs approach with more opportunities to be with you guys and deliver some content and fun and just good banter. We appreciate you listening to Sixers Talk Podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU works for Noah Levick and Ben Berry. I'm Danny Pommells. We'll see you next time.